Derivative is not a dirty word. This phrase has been going through my mind ever since I started playing Horizon Zero Dawn, which, incidentally, is an excellent game. This gorgeous, sprawling, post-apocalyptic robot hunting adventure from Killzone developer Guerrilla Games was a project awaited with nervous enthusiasm. The game looked great, and Guerrilla talked a big talk about their ambition with the project, but there was not entirely unfounded concern about the final product. Guerrilla are famous for creating visual spectacles with a great sense of history and world building, but their previous work sometimes felt a little dull to play. So when Horizon finally arrived this February, and subsequently smashed it out of the park, the community were undoubtedly more than a little surprised. Putting global sales of 2.76 million units aside, the game was well regarded by a wide range of outlets. Consensus praised the game's visuals, its fun and varied combat system, and the lasting appeal of its protagonist Aloy. In fact, Horizon Zero Dawn's critical reception was so overwhelmingly positive that one of the only recurring gripes I saw was that it felt a little bit derivative of other open-world games, taking cues from Far Cry, The Witcher, Assassin's Creed, and to a lesser extent Monster Hunter. It's true that Horizon is a game that wears its inspirations on its sleeve. More to the point, outside of its setting, there is very little about the game that feels groundbreaking or innovative. But why is that a bad thing? Dismissing a game by virtue of one small criticism seems a little petty. It plays to this idea that a game's worth boils down to how innovative it is, how refreshing it feels to play. I do appreciate why some might argue this. In a sea of mediocrity, only the biggest fish shine, and if it's your job to criticise this medium, having to play what is essentially palette swaps of an existing idea can prove a little bit uninspiring. More egregious still, those games that Horizon appears directly inspired by are themselves the offspring of a cycle of iteration and refinement. Products of a ruthlessly efficient dev cycle that allows publishers to churn out sequel after sequel in quick succession. However, I argue that Horizon Zero Dawn excels because of its derivative nature, not in spite of it. It is an example of how evolution over revolution can sometimes be a great thing. Let's take a look at the various aspects that make up Horizon's core experience. We have an open-world environment that sits somewhere between The Witcher and the recent Far Cries. A combat system that borrows heavily from third-person games like Rise of the Tomb Raider, with a tonality that feels like a surface-level homage to the Monster Hunter series. It has collectibles and challenges like a good chunk of Ubisoft's recent back catalogue. It even has its own twist on those infamous radio towers you have to climb in order to unlock ordnance on the map. And, of course, there's loot. Reels and reels of loot. Filling every menu, spilling out onto the floor, seeping into my nightmares. So at first glance we have a game that borrows heavily from others, almost to the point of coming across as cynical. We are reminded of that period in the early 2000s, after Grand Theft Auto 3 exploded onto the scene, when every studio threw their hat into the open-world action-adventure ring. Mixed results ensued, naturally, thanks to copycat design that had little understanding of why the big dogs became so successful. So easily could this have been Horizon's fate, another game that aped its companions while completely missing the point. Thankfully, this is not the case. Guerrilla's gamble paid off in droves, and we were introduced to a wonderful journey through a familiar but very alien world. And the secret to Horizon's success is how well it integrates these derivative component parts into the wider gameplay experience. There is a strong sense of ecosystem about Horizon's design, which is remarkable because this is not a traditionally systems-driven game in the vein of Spelunky or Breath of the Wild. It's a more curated experience that gives the illusion that everything fits together, that every feature of the game matters, thanks to a number of very clever design choices. While the world is open, the way it's designed feels like it's guiding players not to stray too far in one go. Once you become a seeker, about 2 hours in, you're free to go anywhere in the world, but there's a compelling reason to pace yourself through quests, errands, and challenges. Unlike other games that might hold you back through high-level encounters or quite literal gatekeepers, Horizon does this through incentive alone. You can make a beeline for the Cauldrons or the city of Meridian straight from the bat, and there's nothing in the world so powerful that you can't survive escaping it. Add to this the way in which the game's main quest line slowly but decidedly draws you from one end of the map to the other, and there's now a voice in the back of your head that says, "Hold on, friend, maybe we should finish up our business here first."
You saw the numbers. Now Pharaoh, he'll foot the bill, but his money can't buy the time necessary to complete Zero Dawn.
This works wonders compared to games like Far Cry or Assassin's Creed, which have you hurtling across the map every few hours, to the extent where the size of the world starts to feel less like an invitation and more like a burden. By mapping its core storyline progression in a more linear fashion, Horizon's world is the best of both, stage and sandbox, framing a journey without sacrificing player freedom. A freedom that manifests in the form of collectibles, side quests and challenges, all wrapped neatly into the narrative in small, meaningful ways. It's not a case of scouring the map like a festive toper trying to find a contact lens. Early on you can buy maps that give the vague location of these MacGuffins, and there are visual cues that point you in the right direction, like the triangular flora that surrounds metal flowers, or the mountainside markings pointing towards Banuk figurines. While some can be retrieved once they're spotted, or by digging through the dirt, others require more than just finding them, and are small, simple, logistical puzzles unto themselves. The same is true for the Tallnecks, Horizon's radio tower big boys, making each instance feel just that little bit different. And the Hunters Guild provides a razor-thin plot device that is surprisingly effective at encouraging player engagement with the game's challenges.
Use your spear to take control of 2 Ravagers.
As for the combat, while my Monster Hunter comparison is perhaps a little hasty, it's really not that kind of game at all. Horizon is still robust and varied thanks to some excellent encounter design, forcing you to plan ahead, set traps, and be ready to completely abandon everything and reorganize yourself on the fly when you're accidentally spotted by one of those frost-spitting sky bastards. And even if this does happen, the game's surprisingly expansive and quietly understated arsenal allows you to hold your own even if shit hits the fan. Encounters are often tough, and you are but flesh and bone, but the odds never feel unfairly stacked against you. It's a surprisingly flexible system too. There's an optimal way to defeat each type of foe, but it never punishes you for trying something different. It was when I realised that you could quite literally shoot the invisibility off a stalker if you have the right arrow type that I knew Horizon was something special. And Horizon is special, because every aspect of the game is modelled around getting the best out of its mechanisms, and attention to the finer details that furthers player immersion in its world. It's certainly not a perfect game. One particular weak link is the combat encounters with other humans, which feels somewhat underwhelming compared to the epic struggles against larger foes. The game is also perhaps a bit too liberal with pointing out all the cool stuff instead of letting you find it organically. And while the focus is a clever way of tying the user interface into the game's story, said UI is still an ugly mess. But these are specific niggles rather than wider structural problems, and Horizon does a bloody good job of keeping you engaged with all aspects of both its gameplay and story. It's because of this that it feels incredibly lazy to brush the game off as a derivative, stating that it has less value because other games did it first, regardless of how well or poorly it has been implemented in the past. Radio towers and collectibles in open world games were always lame because they felt more like busy work than meaningful experiences. That open world bloat happens when the games in question are as wide as an ocean and as deep as a puddle. As much of an Assassin's Creed fan as I am, these features always felt like they were detrimental to my experience of those games. And they don't feel that way in Horizon. Let me be clear. Horizon Zero Dawn took what other games had, and for the most part made the best version of those things. The same but better is not the same at all. Derivative is not a dirty word. Its value is determined by who utilises it. And there is always room for improvement, and for someone else to try a familiar system with a new frame.